Hi, and welcome to the Instill Culture Lab. My name is Dan, and I'll be your guide where over the next 20 minutes, we host world-class leaders and culture practitioners that have truly earned their wisdom in the category. Today, we get to connect with Darci Mayfield, who we're very excited to talk about, and we're going to explore in a laboratory-like format how she handles tough situations. Not the theory, but the true practice. And the goal is to better equip ourselves to lead our own companies, teams, and organizations with keeping culture at the forefront as everything we do. So, Darci, super great to have you here and excited to jam with you. Darci's is a future of work thought leader, culture architect, and also a remote first culture designer. She and I actually first met at Airbnb, where she was piloting and working on the Airbnb experience platform globally. She moved to a similar line of work for TaxJar, where she helped to internationally architect a fully remote culture, and then also led the culture integration after being acquired by Stripe, if I could say it correctly. She now runs her own culture architecture company called Shift, where she specializes in remote work culture design and everything in between. I know we're going to have a phenomenal time today, Darci. So thanks so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Today, we're going to explore a few case studies on the topic of remote first work and culture design. Some of Darci's specialties, she's had the opportunity to do this globally in some very high profile organizations and also through some times of can be very trying through acquisitions, et cetera. So, Darci, let's just jump into the case studies and start jamming a bit. But let's put ourselves in a position of a people leader. Not hard to imagine for you, since you are. But let's say we're a company that's getting acquired, and culture for us at this company has always been a differentiator for us. And during an all hands meeting, someone asks you specifically, "Hey, Darci, how are we going to ensure that culture that we've worked so hard on to build truly stays alive during this?" So I guess a twofold of a question, but the first of which is like, how do you respond to this person during that meeting? But also like, how do you incorporate culture diligence as part of the overall M&A process to the acquisition?
Yeah, great question. So I would say, a lot of individuals in the workforce have been through a merger or acquisition that has failed and they've had a very negative experience. So you're really talking to the majority of people who are asking these questions because they've probably had a negative experience in the past. And I think the number one thing I would say is to be realistic. Everything might not be fine. It may not work out, but we're going to do our absolute best. And I'll get to the digital diligence part in a second on trying to make sure that these cultures are harmonious. And we understand that culture really drives performance in products. So this is a huge part of the diligence process. But back to the first question, I would say make sure you define a clear communication channel where all questions about the merger and acquisition, all sort of updates that are happening. Everything's happening in transparency in one channel, in one forum where people can ask questions. Hold space for concerns. Understand how the current culture is feeling about it and ask them, if things were to go a certain way, or what has happened to you in the past that you want to avoid in this acquisition, and really targeting a listening strategy to make sure you're incorporating kind of the fears and the experiences that these people have had in the past into your solution kind of architecture into this cultural integration.
Awesome, super interesting. And I love how you're talking about, one of the key pieces too is like culture drives performance. And I think all too frequently, specifically in the M&A world, it's almost as an afterthought. But if we look at integrations and why a majority of these integrations fail, a lot of it is due to culture, which is such an interesting piece. And I love how you're bringing it in the concept of culture diligence. Like, how do you, and I think it actually helps to structure thing, but when you think about the concept of culture diligence, like what does that process look like to you? Are there certain like phases you like to incorporate into, or just curious, like, I think it's such an interesting and important term. Like, how do we incorporate culture into the buying and acquiring and merging process?
Yeah, absolutely. And up until now, there hasn't necessarily been a vast suite of tools to help us measure culture, right? Like
Mhm.
culture is a feeling, it is a set of behaviors and values. It is like my great mentor told me, it is like a flock of birds. It moves together through different environments. It's affected by different weather patterns. And so I really like to use that analogy in understanding, like, is this ecosystem, this culture going to survive
Mhm.
in another environment, in another ecosystem, or will that ecosystem's weather patterns or whatever it may be, is it not built for that? And so that really comes down to thinking about values alignment. And without a tool like Culture AI, because I didn't have, or instill, I'm sorry, in the past, something I did was I worked with the organizational culture assessment instrument by Dr. Coyne and Kim Cameron. And so if you can really understand where your culture is, you can start to sort of map what it could look like with the new culture and the culture you might be going into.
Mhm.
And I'm speaking from a culture getting integrated into another one right now, because that's been the experience I have had. And one kind of very tactical thing I would say that hopefully people will take away from this is look at the current values of your company. Are you a highly collaborative culture? Are you a
Mhm.
highly creative culture? Are you a highly competitive culture? And look at the values of the company in which you're being acquired or merged into. What is similar and what's different? Where
Yeah.
can you see alignment, and where could you immediately say, these things might be a problem? How are we going to solve for them now? And I really think understanding that step by step, creating a bridge from values of one company to the next is incredibly important. You need to do it within kind of that transparent fashion, as well as you just said, 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions fail. We know why. There is no reason this process shouldn't be happening in the diligence process of an M&A. It is expensive not to do it.
Yeah, I think wow, that I had no idea that it was that metric was that high, but I mean that really hits home when you're talking about those percentages and also the time, the effort, the costs that go into this. Like we would be absolutely foolish not to look at this. And I love how you're also phrasing, the kind of the concept of cultural impact comes to mind. So as we
Mm.
go through the M&A process, why are we not looking at cultures and when we're merging companies or acquiring companies, what is that cultural impact this company is going to have? Are they going to get us closest to our cultural goals? Are there elements that we have synergies? Do we want to look for something different culturally because we want to pivot? So I think the
Exactly.
intentionality that you're bringing is super interesting to this process. Then we have more of an end target, and we can think about culture not even as just mashing two things together like a nuclear fusion, but almost like this intentional, what pieces of culture do we want? And will it help us create the culture further that's going to help fuel our business goals and objectives?
Absolutely. And I think that's why, I use the term culture architecture, because it
Hmm.
really is creating a blueprint saying, we're building something, whether it be another room on this office. I use that analogy a lot. We're
Yeah.
putting different furniture in, we're redoing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Like, we have to look at it holistically. And if it's not consistent with the vision that we want to move forward to, then how
Mhm.
are we going to get there?
Yes. No, that's it's such an interesting point, and I love the intentionality again you're bringing to this piece, and how important it is to leverage tools and philosophies, and how can we look at this on the front end so it doesn't bite us on the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's kind of change gears here a little bit. Same concept, of course. We're looking at remote first work and kind of the concepts we can instill to our some of our concepts of work. But let's say you're the first people leader hired at a fast growing remote first company, and you work directly for the CEO, and he essentially charges you with codifying the culture. But the interesting piece is, you're remote first. So how do you go about codifying a culture in this unique environment?
I think a lot of people may challenge me on this, but I actually think it's easier to do it in a remote first
Tell me more.
environment.
Yeah.
And here's why. When you're remote and there's no offices holding the container of the culture, right?
Mm.
Behaviors and values are the only thing that's espoused. And so, what you really have to do is look at what is implicit and make it explicit. And so the number one thing I say is write the culture down. Write down everything you do. And I'm going to use one quick example before I directly answer the question. Um, I was a first people person at a fully remote first environment, and I was charged with codifying the culture. And I had an individual, we were about 60 people at the time, on Zoom ask me what they had to do if they had to go to the bathroom, right? So
That's
we're
too funny. Yeah.
You're laughing, but
Yeah.
this person had come from a government organization. They
Oh,
had
sure.
never
Yeah.
They'd never been in an environment that's had this type of freedom. The assumption of myself and kind of the leadership team and the founders was, we'll hire people who understand this. Well, guess what? When you're hiring them remotely, you're hiring people from all different cultures,
Hmm.
all different walks of life. They don't have a shared experience of taking a BART into an office every
Yeah.
day. They do not have that sense of shared understanding.
Hmm.
And so the first thing I do is really understand, what are the values of the founders? What do they
Hmm.
intrinsically care about? What is the mission of this company? And making sure that's written down very explicitly and leaves very little room for interpretation.
Hmm.
That's a really important piece in this. And the other piece is, very early on, and I'm assuming this case study is kind of questioning from a more like early
Hmm.
standpoint, is okay, is the team using the tools in a certain way? Are there certain communication channels? Is there certain etiquette or emojis or artifacts that we're seeing pop up? Define those, write them down in a single source of truth. Teach them in onboarding, because every person you add is going to use the tools mostly in the way they've used them in the past, or they're going to use them in the way they're watching people use them. And so when you don't have that office as that container, you're looking at values, technology, behavior, and communication to codify the rituals, the artifacts, and the behaviors that you want to see. And so you can strategically do it a lot quicker than just sort of letting it Frankenstein putting four walls around a group of people.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point too, and it has a nice thread to your other point too. Is just the common theme of intentionality
Hmm.
between how we do this, instead of just kind of sitting back and changing remote environments or changing our office, how we're working and where we're working and not doing anything differently. Like, this could be such a powerful way to work that has so many advantages. And the research shows this, but we need to be intentional about how we're shaping. And so I was just kind of writing down some of those notes because I think it's really interesting. A lot of times companies, write down vision, mission, values, but we can look further. Like, we can
Oh, yeah.
look and define pieces like, hey, what's our communication strategy or procedures or policies and how we're communicating? What are those moments that we want to share? What are the emojis? What are those behaviors that we want to be very clear on? Even like the artifacts. I mean, I think now we're starting to, as you mentioned too, and get to the question, like, this is how we codify culture. It's not
Yes.
just a one lens, it's really creating an environment that we know and how to interact and be really humans together, even though we're remote.
100%. I mean, think about if you walk into an office and there's a couch sitting there next to the
Yeah.
host desk. You know it's okay to sit on that couch. It's there. It's empty. It signals sit on me,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't exist in a remote
Yeah.
environment. You have to
Yeah.
think about
Mhm.
how to architect an environment. And
Mhm.
instead of workplace, instead of all these things, I usually use the word environment. It
Yeah.
can be in person, it can be remote, it doesn't matter. But what is the environment you're architecting to signal the behaviors you want to see?
Ooh, I love that. It's so powerful. And yes, it is an environment. And I think that also is a great way to show it's not just one dimensional too. And so we're looking
Yeah,
to really be world class at this. And it's something that we need to define, to write down as founders, but then also hold ourselves accountable to it, making sure that we're training others about it and making sure that we're keeping it living and adding to it. So as our culture ebbs and flows, we have like this process or this document or digital place that we know this is us and this is how we operate.
absolutely. And I think being remote has the advantage of, it's kind of just what you just said, is of being much more adaptive. You can
Hmm.
adapt the culture quicker because
Hmm.
you're seeing it happen much faster.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I love that, Darcy. And then let's kind of jump to the last case study here. Let's put ourselves in the position of a department head, and let's say you're checking in your email, and you got this invite from the CEO. The invite says leadership forum, return to the office. Dun, dun, dun. And so that remote and hybrid work has been really working well for your entire team, and you want to articulate the benefits and also, but like the research and the science behind this in your meeting. Um, but you're also like, you're a business executive and you realize, hey, like, my company has spent a good deal of money on real estate investments. So understanding like the business perspective here and the investments, but also the research of, behind remote first teams, et cetera. Like, what would you do in terms of like creative ideas, research, and case studies that kind of would help propel your argument, or at least your perspective on why the remote first life can be so successful?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few sort of resources I would point to collaborate data, and one of those would be McKinsey and Company's report last year on the
Mhm.
future of work. 40% of individuals globally left their jobs in 2022. We're on track to hit that again this year.
Wow.
One of the top reasons they're leaving is lack of workplace flexibility.
Hmm.
It costs three times an employee's salary to replace them. So their case in point is a very strong sort of argument, right? And I think pointing to things on real estate savings, if they can sort of
Mhm.
decrease their real estate footprint. Global Workplace Analytics has put out many reports. A medium to large business, or I'm sorry, a large company of over 1,000 employees could save up to $6 million a year by supporting remote work. And so there's very significant benefits
Mhm.
financially to this, obviously. But I also think thinking about why behind we're getting together. If you still have offices, fine. What is the reasoning? What is the purpose? How are we going to think about this experience of what can we do in person and what can we do in remote? I'm remote for life. I love getting together in person. Like, it's really important, but only when it's designed with intention. And so I would challenge those leaders
Mhm.
based on not only kind of the financial statistics behind it, but also understand why are you asking people to come back, and
Mhm.
get very clear on that,
Mhm.
because employees will call the bluff
Mhm.
if they're coming into the office just to sit on Zoom.
Yeah, I think those two pieces. I mean, the kind of understanding the why behind it, I think, is always a very
Yeah.
powerful place to start. Like, okay, if we're doing this, like, why are we doing that? What is the intentionality behind it? What are we hoping to achieve or avoid, or what is how are we going to do this intentionally? But also, like, the data that you just rambled off is so really quantifiably
Yeah.
hard to avoid, right? So if we're getting the why statements, and we're also layering in some of the the impacts that this could help save or also avoid or add to our productivity. I feel like it's an argument that, not even an argument, but a debate that can be very well structured and positioned to really favor intentionally shaping and going forward with remote first cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just watching a thing on CNN recently. They were talking about, there's these huge office buildings in New York that are
Mhm.
almost empty. They've started subleasing them to movie sets. They made over $3 million on like the film industry this year. Pickleball courts. They're redoing parts of offices because there's like a lack of pickleball courts. So that's a whole nother realm. But
Yeah.
just to think, like, how do we repurpose these spaces
Mhm.
as multi-use spaces and rethink sort of the meaning and the why behind it all?
Yes, I think that's a great way to wrap up too. Is we can, as leaders, understand the meaning of what we're doing and the why behind it, and start to look at some of the research and data that's showing how we can intentionally build cultures remote first. I think it's going to be an interesting place for us to really ignite the power of our people in a more meaningful way and in an environment that really resonates with you.
Yeah.
So thanks, Darci, for joining. It's been super fun. And thanks to our audience also for joining us on the Instill Culture Lab. Remember that creating a world class culture isn't just something that happens overnight. It's these little things we do over time. So if we can help to inject some of the pieces and learnings that we've had from Darci today, we'll be in a great space tomorrow and help have a better culture all around. So thanks everyone for joining. If you liked what you hear today, the best way to help and appreciate is just to share this. So thank you so much and chat soon.